You are listening to a TechSide Network podcast, TechSide.net, casual conversation from technically passionate people.
This podcast contains harsh language and covers adult topics. You will be challenged by views with which you do not agree. We may not be politically correct, but we are correct about politics. Racism. Now there's a word that's lost a lot of its impact due to overuse. I don't often appeal to emotion, and I don't know how old you are, but I want you to take a moment to remember what it used to feel like to hear someone called a racist about 15 years ago. It was a break glass in case of emergency insult, and rightly so. The impact of this word was then used to work as a club and a muzzle. You could discredit your opponent and shut them up with a simple accusation. That is, until the magic wore off and the word lost its meaning. This phenomenon reminds me of Godwin's Law. Godwin's Law says that every internet argument, given enough time, eventually devolves into someone calling the other side a Nazi. If you took a time machine 30 years into the past and called someone a racist or a Nazi, you might get a bloody lip for your trouble. Today, it's more common for the slur to be ignored. But we use words to convey meaning. We use them to identify and categorize reality. When these words lose their impact, I argue that they lose some of their meaning as well. Instead of a Nazi being a socialist with the explicit race superiority ideas, it's now someone with whom I disagree on politics. Fascist got this treatment as well. Racist now means almost the opposite of its original meaning, with the latest moronic, vacuous blatherings out of academia saying that to be colorblind, i.e. to judge a person as an individual with no importance given to their race, is itself racist. If this kind of rhetoric keeps up the pace, we can switch the whole country over to renewable energy, as I'm sure Martin Luther King Jr. is spinning in his grave fast enough to power the eastern seaboard. Were you able to remember the disgust you felt before this word was perverted? Were you able to conjure the mixture of unease, confusion, and disdain felt towards actual racists? If you could, I'm glad. You should feel that way when the word is used correctly and in the proper context. Today, I argue that capitalism, the system which recognizes individual rights, punishes racism and all other forms of irrational prejudice. Now, let's define our terms. When I say capitalism, I always mean laissez-faire, free market, entirely unregulated capitalism. When I say racism, I do not mean the backwards, regressive, idiotic neo-Marxist definition with which our children are being re-educated at university. If you are not familiar with this false definition, allow me to be the first to unenlighten you. Today, the ultra-left intersectional theorists, read the professors in our tax-funded schools, claim that racism is prejudice plus power. Put plainly, you can only be racist if you have the ability to make your racism felt in society at scale. Under this definition, a white man who will have nothing to do with Brazilians as he thinks they are lazy is rightly labeled racist. But a black man who thinks that all Jews are untrustworthy well poisoners is not racist. This is because the white man is seen to have power in society, and the black man is not. It is clear on its face that this is not your layman's understanding of racism. You likely have a definition in your mind that goes something like, judging a man unfairly based upon his race. If yours is close to this, then you are more correct than the above formulation. But I like to be specific with my definitions. Definitions are the guardians of rationality. The best one I've heard comes from, you guessed it, Ayn Rand. Here's what she has to say. Quote, racism is the lowest, most crudely primitive form of collectivism. It is the notion of ascribing moral, social, or political significance to a man's genetic lineage, the notion that a man's intellectual and characterological traits are produced and transmitted by his internal body chemistry. Unquote. She goes on to say that, quote, racism is a doctrine of, by, and for brutes. It is a barnyard or stock farm version of collectivism, appropriate to a mentality that differentiates between various breeds of animals, but not between animals and men, unquote. And, quote, Like every form of determinism, racism invalidates the specific attribute which distinguishes man from all other living species, his rational faculty. Racism negates two aspects of man's life, reason and choice, or mind and morality, replacing them with chemical predestination." Unquote. This definition is the one that I will be using moving forward. It is clear, therefore, why we should have a negative reaction to racism. It is irrational, anti-life. Racism is irrational because you must deal with individuals. Let's play this out. Let's assume that it were true that Spanish people were smarter, on average, than Irish people. Even if this were true, it tells you nothing about an individual Irishman or Spaniard. If a man applies to a job that has nothing to do with race, and one of the criteria you consider is his race, you are being irrational. Why? Because his membership in an unchosen group tells you nothing about him. A man's ability is in no way tied to his lineage, and a free market only cares about how smart you are and how hardworking, i.e. how diligent you are, and if you are able to innovate. Now, I can hear you saying, "But Dan, not everyone is rational, not everyone uses reason. Some people will still be racist." This is true. Some people hold bad philosophy. Some are just ignorant. But they still have the same rights as you. One of these rights is the right to property, the right to acquire and dispose of the fruits of their labor as they see fit. They cannot be forced to associate with people they do not wish to associate with. You have no more right to force someone to hire person X than you do to force them to allow person X into their home. That is their right. Let's bring this down to concretes. Alice owns a flower shop in Boston. Alice is a racist. She refuses to hire or sell to Chinese people. Bill is a Chinese man who wants to buy flowers for his wedding. Alice refuses to sell to Bill and tells him to leave. Chen is a Chinese man, a horticulturist who is looking for a job. Alice again points to the door. Bill and Chen did not receive flowers or a job from Alice, but neither were their rights violated. Bill does not have an inalienable right to flowers. Chen does not have a right to force Alice to give him a job. Judging solely based on human rights, Alice is in the clear. But the above example should bother you. Morally, you know it's not right. I made the claim that capitalism punishes racism. We can now clearly see at least two ways that it does. First, would you like to associate with Alice, someone who would not hire or trade with some member of a different race? Do you want your wedding decorated with the flowers of a racist? I think you would not, especially if you're marrying a Chinese person. That is your right, not to associate with them, and more. I know that if a business near me had an Irish need not apply sign out front, I would be boycotting, picketing, and shouting on every platform that I could until I saw them either change their ways or be driven from the market. I'll bet you feel similarly, as do the majority of your neighbors. Second, Alice's own unreason hurts her business, as it must. She is cutting herself off from a whole talent pool for an arbitrary and irrational reason. At best, this slows her business growth. At worst, she'll be outcompeted by anyone else in the field who does not hamper themselves thusly. If she also refuses to sell to some group, it is even more obvious how this would do harm to her business. From just these two examples, we can see how reality and market forces will degrade and destroy any business that deals with people irrationally. We can see that these forces work from both within and from without. We can see that a system which protects individual rights will necessarily reward those who wield reason, who conform to reality, who use their minds, and punish those who do not. There is one place where it is proper to use force to ensure that all people of all races are treated fairly and equitably. The government of a free society must secure the rights of all men equally, or else it is not a free society. This means that it is an unacceptable injustice if a government enacts laws that have the effect of treating members of certain groups differently before the law. There is also a lot to talk about why racists are racist, and why we have seen an uptick in racism, and how collectivistic systems like socialism and communism necessarily lead to racism through pressure group warfare. but that's for another cast. Right now we have our Tweet of the Week. Our Tweet of the Week this week comes from none other than presidential candidate and communist sympathizer Comrade Sanders. Boy, was it awkward to feel badly for this cretin when he was stabbed in the back by Commissar Warren. She has proven herself to be a pathological liar, so I very much doubt that this revelation that Sanders is suddenly a big ol' misogynist is accurate. She's just another looter, looking to get power by any means necessary. She is the left's version of Donald Trump, lying whenever it suits her. Despite my recent sympathy for the old codger due to the injustice he faced publicly during the debates, where the questions went the way of, "When did you stop beating your wife?" he must be criticized for his backwards and destructive ideas. His tweet is as follows. "It is not freedom when you have to work 3 jobs just to survive. It is time to say that real freedom must include a living wage and economic security." How insightful, Bernie! Freedom is slavery. I can't believe I didn't see it before. Of course I'm entitled to someone else's work by force. Why didn't it occur to me that I could just take unearned bread from the mouths of those who's produced it? We could just loot from people who make the things we need to survive. That couldn't possibly have any negative repercussions, right? Just eat the rich if you're hungry. It is important to understand that your rights are freedoms of action. Life, liberty, property, and the pursuit of happiness. Note here that it is the pursuit of happiness that the founders specified. They were careful with their words. You don't have a right to be happy, as then it would be everyone else's duty to make you happy. You have a right to make yourself happy, however you see fit. You cannot have a right that some other person must provide. When Senator Sanders says that freedom must include a living wage and economic security, we must ask the question, at whose expense? Who will pay for these things? Who will provide? Someone needs to produce the values that you seek to consume, whether it be champagne, baby diapers, antibiotics, or iPhones. Do they have the same rights? Can they refuse to provide you with these things, or does that infringe upon your freedom? Doesn't this infringe upon their right to property, to dispose of it or not as they see fit? We have a word for labor that one is forced to provide. Slavery. If you would like me to cover a specific topic, I can be reached on Twitter at @AmericanitisTech. That's the @ American, ITISTEK, or at Americanitis@techside.net. Please subscribe to the show in Apple Podcasts or Google Play, and take the time to leave us a review and comment. We have a Patreon page which enables you to support the podcast for as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/techside. Show notes are available at techside.net/Americanitis. We thank you all for listening. Later days.